great. All right, we'll do it. What's going on, guys? My name is Bruce. Welcome back to my channel, and the effect I'm going to break down for you today is now, I've been asked many times and by many people how to do a city fly-through. This was actually one of the first ones I'd ever done, and one of my first 3D scenes, in fact. Since then, I've done many more, and some more complex than others. But as this was my first, it's much simpler and a great example for people to learn from. Now, to recreate this effect, you're going to need Adobe After Effects and a plugin from Video Copilot called Element 3D. As we're doing a city fly-through, you will also need the Metropolitan pack from Video Copilot, which is a city model pack that you can use inside of Element 3D. Now, as always, I plan everything on my notes on my phone. However, as this was predominantly 3D, there wasn't many shots I actually needed to get for it. What I did do though, and what I do with all of my videos, is I storyboard the whole effect from start to finish. So I had a plan to work from during shooting and editing. So let's get straight on with it. Now, I'll bring my phone up here and show you how I went about planning my shots, or should I say shot, and also how I plan my 3D scenes. Also, of any props, equipment, and considerations I need to take into account when shooting this and editing. So, city fly-through storyboard. Camera pans along a foggy city street towards a bus stop as a bus pulls up. Attach BV logo to the bus stop advertisement sign. Now, I like to incorporate my logo into my videos and normally in the 3D scenes, so this just felt like a good place to put it. The camera then pulls back, up, and twists upside down while rising above the city block. A keyed out clip of me looking down at the floor with some keyed out footage of some fire is attached to the top of the building. The camera then approaches the top of the building, twisting back upright. I look up as soon as the camera reaches me. I then point to the right, my left, which is the direction the camera then follows. End of scene, next scene, billboard transition. So that leads on to the next clip. Now, you already know all of this because you've seen the video, but having it planned out like this really helps, especially when you're shooting and you want to be reminded what's happening in the scene and when. It also helps when you have lots of 3D scenes planned for one video and you don't want to accidentally forget something. Models, me. Props, none. Additional equipment, tripod, green screen. Now, in my last video, I talked about green screens in more depth. I am, however, going to do a full video on how to use a green screen and what they're used for. So make sure you check back in the future for when I've posted that. However, for now, I'm going to carry on the basis you know what a green screen is and what we use it for. Considerations. Find a well-lit environment with diffused lighting outside on a cloudy day. I didn't want any harsh shadows on the green screen or the subject, so me. On that note though, unless I want shadows for a particular reason, I try and avoid them always in my videos. I just don't really like the way that they look. So moving further on down, make sure you point to your left. This is just so I remember the right way to point, as that's the way the virtual camera will go next. Increase shutter on camera to reduce motion blur. I talked about this in my previous video, about where you increase the shutter speed, you'll decrease the motion blur. I'm not going to get too in depth with it now, as I covered a lot of it in the last video, and I will cover more of it when I do a full green screen video. But increase your shutter speed and you'll reduce motion blur, thus being able to key out the footage much easier. You can then add in motion blur in post once you've already keyed your subject out. Shoot in 4K. The higher quality you shoot, the better the key will be. Shooting in an uncompressed format will be even more beneficial as well. Unfortunately, I only have the A6500 which shoots in H.264 codec, but if you can shoot in an uncompressed format, especially when you're using a green screen, then use it. However, shooting with H.264 on this occasion worked out fine. Shot list. Lock camera off on tripod, then stand in front of the green screen. I mean, this is quite self-explanatory, but there's some really important things in here. As I'm going to key myself out and stick myself on top of a building, I can't have any camera movement or camera shake in the video. If you do, then you'll get some very weird floating effect when you put that footage on top of an object in a 3D scene, as the position of the floor in the video clip will keep moving with the camera movement that you shot it with. I really don't want to go too much in depth with it, but what I will say is save yourself a headache. Shoot the video locked off on a tripod at eye level and you won't have any problems. Begin each take with myself looking at the floor, then look up, stare into the camera and point to your left. Keep pointing for a few seconds. To give a dramatic effect, I wanted to be looking down before the camera reached me. I then wanted to look up, stare at the camera and point in the direction I wanted the camera to actually go, or at least the virtual camera. I already knew the camera was going to go to the right, my left, which is why I emphasized to make sure I was pointing in that direction. Get a few takes. Now with each take I needed to start with my head looking down, followed by looking up at the camera, waiting a second or so, and then pointing into that direction. Right, as so many of you has asked for this video, I'm going to do it a little bit different. We're going to jump into After Effects, but before I break down the effect, I want to give you a very quick and dirty tutorial on how to build a scene and animate a camera around a scene. Now this is not an in-depth tutorial on how to use Element 3D, so I'll be keeping it very brief. If you get stuck, then there are tons of videos online explaining how to use Element 3D in quite some detail. So without further ado, let's jump into After Effects and I'll show you how I made this effect. Okay, so this is going to be my quick and dirty tutorial on how to create a 3D fly-through scene. So if you come down into your composition, right click, hit new, and then come over to solid, and then if you want to name that, I name mine element, and then you want to right click, new, create a camera. I like to use a 2-node camera, it's a lot easier to use. I'm not going to get into depth now the difference between the two, but this is the one I like to use. So 2-node camera, and you can keep all these settings pretty much the same, and then hit OK. So now we come to the solid, come to effect, video copilot, and click element. This adds the effect to the layer, and then we can click this and it'll open up a new window, and this is now our 3D scene. So if you've installed the Metropolitan pack, you have Metropolitan here, and you get a few different versions. You get one with no antenna and you get one with these render slightly faster, so we'll just go for these ones for now. And there is actually some pre-built cities in here, so you can actually select some of these yourself and build your scene out. So let's just click this one for example, and this is this block here, so we can add another to that if we just click this one now and we can move it over. Okay, I'm going to make this perfect, but you can sort of see where this is going. I'm using the middle mouse button to move around the scene, the left clicking and holding to spin around the scene, and then we can add, let's add another one here, and we can move that over like so, and then you've got yourself a very basic city. What you're going to want to add to this as well is an environment. So come up to environment, and then you'll be able to load an environment from where Element installed. So let's just choose this one for instance, click Gold Skyline, hit OK, and then we can tap the environment. We can tap the environment and we can see it's reflecting off the windows, and we can actually have this into our scene as well when we go back into the composition. So this will be the scene we're going to use, so we can hit OK on that. And now we want to use the camera, so we click the camera, and if you tap the C key you get these different options. So this one is zoom, this one is pan around, and this one is move around. So let's start off with zooming in. So you click and hold once you're on the zoom, and then we're going to go up. So let's go to this side, and then we're going to spin with this one. So if I move this over a little bit here, let's go this way here, and then let's also rotate a little bit, say here would do. So to create a very basic fly through, if we're going to say for instance fly through down this path, you want to put yourself on the first keyframe, start the composition and create a keyframe by clicking this, and it'll create a keyframe for the point of interest and the position. Then if you move along the timeline, say 16 seconds, we can then use the zoom key to zoom in and move around for instance. And now we're going through the city, through these buildings as you can see. So now that's going to create another keyframe, and we can actually come down as well if we want to, like so. So then that is the very basic flying through the city. What you would also add to this as well, you would add more buildings here for instance, but when you come into your element here, when you go onto your render settings and then come down to physical environment, you can actually turn on showing background, and this will actually have the background in there as well. So once you've built your scene out properly, you'll be able to see the background behind it, so it won't look completely black or blank for instance. And then here you can see now just by moving it across slightly. We create another keyframe and that will go left and it will move into the city. And this is how you create a very, very basic fly through on the city. Okay, so now you learned the fundamentals. I'm going to show you the actual effect that you saw at the start of the video. And this is what we're going to break down. Okay, so what I normally do is I'll start from the bottom and work my way up. So the very, very bottom one is actually the night sky background. And all this is just a picture. This is just a picture that comes with Element 3D as, I think it's called Metropolitan Skies. And you can use this in your scenes, and you can use it as an environment. You can also use it as a background. It's actually switched off, and I'll show you why it's switched off in a moment. And I'll get to that, back to that in a second. The next one up from that is the element layer. This is basically just a solid with the element effect applied. So as I showed you a second ago, that's what this is. So if we actually go into the scene itself, and I'll show you what this actual scene is. This is the scene like I just showed you. So these are the metropolitan buildings, and I've also added a bus stop in here as well. Okay, in this bus stop you can see this is where I actually decided to put my logo. Now the way I got my logo into here is, as you can see, it says bus stop. When I come down to here, which happens to be this object, because these are separated into separate objects, so if I was to turn this one off, you can see it turns off that. If I turn off this one, it turns off that. So these are separate objects, and this one happens to be the actual sign. And if you come down to here to where it says textures, there's an option for a diffuse, and if I come in here I can actually load in my own picture. What I did is I decided to put my logo in there. Now I actually had to flip it around, and the reason is because I think the normals of this object were facing the wrong way. I'm not going to get into depth onto what that means. I could go into a 3D program and change the normals back the right way, but a real quick and dirty easy way to fix it would be to flip the image around. So I just flip the image around and put it into there. If I wanted to put, for instance, Rob in there from a previous tutorial, I could do that, and there he is in there. Alright, the actual scene itself, you don't really need to concern yourself with too much, because this is part of a different scene. So the way you build the scene up, you do it the same as I showed you in the previous section. This is just a separate object that I've put in here, which is a bus stop, and the only other thing is there's a separate object, which is the bus, or should I say coach, and that's on a separate group. So all of these, as you can see here, these buildings and bus stops are on group 1, and this bus is on a group 3, and there's a reason for that, and I'll show you later on. Okay. The other thing to add to this is if you go to environment, I've got this in here, which is custom layer 1, and I'll show you how you get that in there, which is the night sky background that you just saw a moment ago. Alright, so that's the picture that you saw in the composition, and I'll show you how you load that into there. Okay, so that's all there is with this. That's just the scene setup itself. So the way I actually got this background to be loaded into Element is you can come up to custom layers and you can do custom texture maps. Now once you click this, you can choose any of the layers in your composition, and because I've chose night sky background, it also gives me an option here to choose the source, masks that are applied to it, and any effects that are also applied to it. I haven't added any effects to it, so I just need to use the source. Also as well, if it was a video clip you could use, I could choose what frame I want to use, but it's a still picture, so it doesn't really matter. And that's how you load anything that you want from the comp into the scene. The other thing that I've done with this layer that will give it a dramatic effect is I've added some glow. So this is a really, really simple option in Element 3D to add glow, as you can see, just like that. I've also added some ambient occlusion. This is like sort of surface shadows, fake surface shadows. It gives it a bit more depth, a bit more realism. Okay, it does slightly increase your rendering time, but it's not too bad. It's not ray tracing though, but it does give it a nicer effect. Okay, so other than these layers, I'll move on straight up to the camera. So this is where the actual animation takes place. So this camera is just like I showed you a moment ago. It's just a bunch of keyframes here. So you can see I start off here, I move into the bus. I'm going to turn off motion blur a second. So I start off here, I move into the bus, I go close up to the sign, and then I pull back, and then I come around, and then I come up here. And the way this is operated is just from some simple position, location and rotation keyframes. So if I was to move this keyframe around, you can see it's going to be changing where I am at, where I'm at. As you can see, I've changed the animation because of that. And you can play around with this to your heart's content to get the actual desired effect you want. This is the part where it comes up close to me, as you can see these keyframes here, and then it moves along slightly to the right hand side because it's panning across me, and then this is just how it carries on for the rest of the animation. Okay, and that goes into the next part of the scene. I can't teach you these keyframes, it's something that you're going to have to play around with yourself, but it just gives you the fundamentals of how I've gone about getting this to go where I want it to go. Okay, so moving up from that, there's a me no, and I'll go into what that actually is. But this one here is the video of me stood on top of the building itself, like that. Now all this is just a video clip of me that's been keyed out, and that's just me pointing over to my left. I've keyed that out, and then I've put that on top of the building. And now the way I got it on top of the building and to actually stick in that building is I've made the layer 3D, and once you make a layer 3D in 3D space, it will act as though it's a 3D object. But what I need to do first is I need to find the location of this building in 3D space. So to find the location of that building, if you come to your element layer, go to the effect, come to utilities, you can generate 3D position. So you select a 2D position with this target. So let's just say we want to choose over here, like that. You then click generate 3D null, and that now has created a null at that point right there. So then when I move the playhead, you can see that that null is stuck to that position because that is now in 3D space. So the way to actually get myself onto that is I'll start this off how you would when you first get it into your composition. So I'll just reset everything there. Okay, I shot this in 4K. This comp is 1080p, that's why my head's cut off at the top. So the first thing you need to do is you're going to need to make this layer 3D. If you don't, you're not going to get a Z-axis location. So you need to make yourself layer 3D, and you also get X, Y, and Z. If you don't get the Z. So you need that. Go to your element position, come to position, Control C on position, and then you want to go to Control V on the position of the layer you want to move. So that one. That's now put this layer in the same position as that now, albeit very large. So what you want to do then is bring the scale down, something very, very small, say 1.5. As you can see now, it's put me where that null is. It's put me using the anchor point, so I could move the anchor point if I wanted to, like this, and move myself up like that. Or I could just move the position. It doesn't really make a difference, to be honest. What you're going to want to do is want to rotate slightly, probably on the Y, to make myself look a bit more in line with the camera, like so. And I'll probably want to move myself over slightly as well. You can still move yourself around because you're in the ballpark of where this position is. Okay, Z depth will make a big difference as to where you are, as to the perspective of the camera. So now, when I move the camera, I'm stuck to that position instead. That's all you need to do to get yourself in that position. Okay, the next layer from that is a shadow of me. So same principle as this. All I've done is I've just duplicated this layer and put it here. And then what I did is I've just flipped it slightly. So I've transformed it, as you can see, using a transform effect. I've added a fill to make it completely black, because at the moment it is just the video of me. So I made it a fill to make it completely black, and I've added a blur as well. What I did also do is I brought down the opacity. As you can see, it was way too much. If I take off these, you can see it's just a video of me. So fill, Gaussian blur, and then bring this down to say something like 28 or so. You can use lights to create real shadows, but I'm not going to go into depth into that today. So this is a very quick and dirty way to get a shadow in your scene, like that. Gives it a bit more realism, a little bit more realism anyway. Okay, next one from that is rooftop fire. This is just some green screen smoke. I'll show you, it's been keyed out, nothing too fancy with that. Same principle with this one. So to get this one into the position, I need to do exactly the same thing again as I did with myself here. Same thing, generate a null, position, and put the smoke on. One up from that is fog. So this is the starting one, which is the fog. So with the fog, I just added some keyframes here for opacity. So it starts off quite high, which is there, and then the fog just fades away. Element 3D doesn't allow you to do anything like volumetrics, unfortunately, not yet anyway. So this is just a very quick, simple way to do it. Gives a bit of an effect. The only other thing really that you're going to need to concern yourself with is this bus that's moving. So the way I did that is, if you remember in the element, this bus was on group 3. It's a separate group to the rest of the objects. And when objects are in separate groups, you can actually manipulate them differently. So if you look into the effect options here, you've got group 3. So if I go into group 3 and I go into particle look, replicator, you can see there's a position for that particle. And because this is going to adjust the whole group, anything I do to this would move the whole of the group, but the only thing that's in the group is the bus. So if I was to move this up, for instance, or across, you can see the bus is moving this way, and if I move this one, which is the Y, the bus is moving up and down. So as you can see, this one here is just the Z, and it's just moving the bus backwards and forwards. So all I did is, if I come into this, we hit U, we can see those keyframes here. Z position, there to there, you can see there is just some keyframes of it moving, and then it just eases in. So if I was to move this keyframe, you can see the bus is going to move because it's going to be slowing down the animation going this way, or speeding up the animation going this way. The wheels on the bus don't actually move. So if you look at the wheels, they're not moving. And this is why I hid it behind the bus stop, so you don't really notice. As far as I'm aware, this one isn't rigged, so I can't do that. You can get certain objects that are rigged, which you can animate these separately using aux channels, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. This is just a very quick demonstration on how to build a 3D scene and how I've done it to get that effect. One other thing you're going to want to add to your composition is you're going to want to add motion blur. Motion blur is the thing that's going to tie all this together, and it's going to sell the effect. So you're going to want to switch on motion blur for every single layer that you want motion blur on. So element 3D, the background isn't going to matter too much because that's going to be part of the element 3D anyway. All of these, and these ones as well. Fog not so much, it's not going to matter too much with fog because it's not a 3D layer. But these ones in particular, so if I come up here and then switch on motion blur, you can see everything now has got motion blur. But if I switch them off, so for me, if I switch it off, you can see I've not got motion blur now. So you can see I don't have motion blur, but the rest does, which looks out of place. So you need to make sure you switch on motion blur for every single layer. So here's the smoke, no motion blur, with motion blur, and finally the element without it, with it. So you need to make sure you stick motion blur on for all your objects, and it'll give a much nicer dramatic effect. So when you finish the whole thing, the effect you should get is and that's it, guys. I hope that's given you some insight on how to create your 3D scene and animate a camera around it. I hope you enjoyed that, guys. I'll link the video this has come from down below. If there's any other effects in that video you want me to break down, let me know in the comments of this video or that video. I'll also link the footage I used down below so you can have a go yourself. But thanks anyway, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.